Hello listeners, it's Mark here to let you know that the results are in. We ran some polls over the weekend to gauge fan opinion on a number of Rugby League hot topics. We had a really good response, to thanks to all of you that have taken part and all of you that shared the polls about as well. Some of the polls were clear cut one way or the other, some not so much. For this episode of SLP Shorts, I'm going to take you through the results and some of the replies we got, and I'll throw some of my opinions in along the way too. So let's start with the first question we threw out there, the big question, I suppose, that everyone has been talking about over the last week. The question was, do you have confidence in the Rugby Football League CEO, Ralph Rimmer? And probably unsurprisingly, 6% of you voted yes, you do have confidence in Ralph Rimmer, and an overwhelming 94% said no, you don't have confidence in Ralph Rimmer, and that had 530 votes on that poll, so that's a pretty conclusive result there. A few people came back with a little bit of an opinion. Genghis Campbell said, God-awful abomination of a sports administrator who dresses like a geography teacher and has the strategic vision of David Brent. I'm guessing Genghis went no. Carl Fishwick at Carl the Jarl 1 said, all of the RFL need to resign. The last 10 years have been disgraceful. I'm not exaggerating when I say the sport is in intensive care in the UK. Brew at 13 Roo said, where is he? He used to always be in the news. Since taking the top job, there's more chance of Madeleine McCann rocking up. Yeah, Brew, he did do a bit of a media offensive, didn't he, when he was campaigning for his informally, unofficially campaigning for the job of CEO, when he would pop up in his fancy sports jackets and sat with the Hearns having a coffee and making sure those pictures got up there. But as we know, that's come to nothing. Maybe he's just a bit upset that the Hearns aren't returning his calls anymore, so he doesn't go out in public. Stephen Blackburn at Steve8592, his response to this question was, can you add in a question, is Elston just McManus's and Lenigan's puppet? I'm not sure if this meant you voted yes or no, Stephen, but yeah, I can't really think of a neutral way to phrase the question that you've asked, because you've kind of put your view out there strongly on that one. You haven't really made it open for people to come back, and I would say Robert Elston is the man who's leading the Super League, but as I understand it, the Super League clubs all have an equal vote on things, so I think it's pretty impossible for him to just be the puppet of two of the owners. But thanks for getting in touch. I did speak to one of the people who voted yes, and their reason for voting yes, I found it slightly unconvincing. They said that it seems a little bit unfair, without knowing the full picture and the full circumstances of everything, to pin this all on one guy. And I get where they're coming from with that, and I suppose we could have made the question, do you have confidence in the heads of the RFL more generally, or in the RFL board more generally? But I think the point here is someone has to be accountable for what's going on, and the stuff particularly over the Challenge Cup, but also getting us into this state where Super League had to stage this kind of step away from the governing body, where they have no faith in the direction that they're taking the sport in. So they now are feeling the need to protect their own asset, as it were, in Super League. Rimmer's played a huge part in that himself, because he's been part of that regime for a significant number of years now, and taken us through a lot of changes, and been a senior figure in managing that. And when he took over as the Chief Executive Officer, I think I wanted to give him some benefit of any doubt that maybe he was acting under other people, maybe he was kind of railroaded into certain actions or decisions, but at the end of the day, he's been the top dog now for basically all of 2018, because he was acting CEO before he was confirmed in the role, and he hasn't he hasn't done anything to correct the wrongs. He hasn't shown a learning from the previous mistakes. It's almost like he's kept his position of self-preservation, keeping himself in a job, keeping himself with a handsome pay packet, and he needs to be accountable. Ask the man at the top. I'm not saying, and like Carl says, maybe other people need to resign as well. There's certainly people on the payroll who aren't worth what they're reportedly getting paid, and Brian Barwick would be the man at the top of that list. But yeah, it was Dave who got in touch explaining that. I appreciate what he's saying. We don't know the full picture about all these decisions that are being made, and it would be nice to know a bit more. And I'm sure it is a very difficult job, but at the end of the day, that man has to be accountable. Okay. The second question that we asked was, do you agree with the RFL approach to get non-member clubs to pay a £500,000 bond to be part of the Challenge Cup? And this one, if anything, was the most one-sided of the polls that we put out. So 4% said yes, they agree that they should be made to pay to play in the competition. 96% said no, that they should not have to pay to be part of the Challenge Cup. And when you're talking about the holder of the Challenge Cup, when you're talking about some of the more progressive, intriguing, entertaining sides out there, I suppose we have to put the caveat always on this, that Toulouse may not have wanted to take part in the competition anyway. They haven't played part in the competition in recent years through choice, without any bond being required. So whilst they have been a great excitement machine, and aside that, we've all sort of taken to our hearts in a little bit because we enjoy watching them play. Maybe they shouldn't be part of this conversation. But Toronto, the leading lights of expansion, and Catalan Dragons, the big club. The big club who hold the cup, to ask those teams to do it does seem like lunacy to me. So I too am in the no camp to me. David Lum at LumD said, one of the most ridiculous rugby league related things I've ever heard. Even if there was some sort of bond, who on earth came up with that amount? Yeah, and who on earth came up with how it would work? I would love to know what the RFL did to exhaust all other options on this. We have spoken about this quite a bit of length. There was a show that me and Alan did before Christmas where we talked about this when the news first broke about this, and that was centered mostly around the Toronto Wolfpack aspect. So please do go back and listen to that. That was the SLP Debate Club episode 1, and recently in SLP Debate Club episode 2 with Tim and with Nate Gladden from the Rugby League in America podcast. We covered that a little bit. So go and listen to those if you want to dive into our views on that more. But I agree with the 96%. The next question may be a little bit more controversial. It certainly split the vote much more, and it was the closest run vote of all of these, and it was: is it time to move the Challenge Cup final away from Wembley? Now, this question, to frame it a little bit more, obviously it's being posed because the final's losing money. If the final wasn't losing money, we wouldn't need these ridiculous bonds to be put forward, or guarantees of sales of tickets to be covered for these expansion clubs. And we know attendances have dwindled. Part of that was, since we moved to the new Wembley, the removal of the automatically applied to the attendance figure Club Wembley seats, whether they were occupied or not, which in a way gives us a better picture of what's actually going on and what tickets we're actually selling. But the last 2 years have been unacceptably low attendances, particularly this year when that's taken into consideration. So to get to the answers on this one, yes, it's time to move the cup final. 42% voted yes, it's time to move the cup final, and 58% voted no, keep it at Wembley. Now, there was 339 votes on that one, so it was one of the smaller voted on topics, but those who did vote seemed pretty split. Mark Butler at Mark Butler 1978 got in touch. He said, it's very interesting that this one poll is that divisive. For what it's worth, I think that in a game where, in quote marks, we need better marketing is a mantra that so many would consider moving on from an iconic venue, presumably to retreat to the north and pitch at more of the same people. And then Graham Littler at Adel Wire said, stay at Wembley, just promote the sport better. Having had many trips to Wembley, we need the neutrals back. Yeah, and I'm definitely in the no camp on this, as much as it can be possibly sustainable, which it does look like there's a challenge, but I really don't feel that there's any purpose. Now, I'm recording this after just listening to the 4020 Live podcast, which once you've listened to episodes of SLP, that's the next best thing out there for Rugby League, I would say. And they kind of talk on that. What's the point of having it if we're not at Wembley? And I agree with that sentiment completely. If we can't afford to stage the Challenge Cup at Wembley, we lose a lot of what's special about it. If we can't. If we move it away from Wembley to sell it better, what does that say? What message does that give? So yeah, in terms of how we promote it better, I don't like to just say we need better marketing or let's promote it better. In terms of how we promote it better to the neutrals, I do feel the move of the date from 2020 to July should be a positive thing. We'll be pitching it the weekend after schools finish, so you can get more schools groups, more community club groups to possibly attend that title, to attend the final. And moving it away from that bank holiday weekend might make some of the travel issues that have been faced with lots of rail replacement works seeming to get done on that weekend of the year, costs being a little bit higher because it's the final weekend of the school summer holidays usually. So move it back to earlier. That might help alleviate some of those stresses and strains. And actually it might mean we can condense the whole Cup programme so there's more momentum behind the Challenge Cup as well. So that's one of the moves that I think is a positive one. And when we criticise the RFL for lots of stuff, I think that, along with the principal broadcasters of the BBC, who also draw a lot of criticism, that's something that should be supported because lots of people have asked for it to be moved to earlier in the year. Okay. Do you think running a reserve side should be mandatory for Super League clubs? And I would like Mr. Elston and the chairman of the Super League clubs to take particular note of this poll, actually, because it echoes what the players said in a recent Rugby League World poll. And in our poll, there was 365 people voted, so it's not an insignificant number. 93% said yes, reserves should be mandatory for Super League clubs. 7% saying no. David K at DKP said reserves yes, but filtered into tier 3. I'm not quite clear on what David meant on that, but I guess some sort of level where the reserve sides are playing in a sort of semi-professional capacity alongside the semi-professional clubs of our third tier, potentially. I'm not quite sure, but I do feel reserves, there's a clear benefit there. Lots of people seem to see that. The costs don't seem to be particularly high. You're talking about players whose wages you're paying anyway. There's possibly ways to work it around so that there's still an element of loan or dual registration built into the system as well. You don't have to play a reserve game every single week of the year that matches the league fixture. You can do something a little bit different there, be a bit flexible with those, but put a league in place where there's set fixtures and you can work around that. So I definitely agree with all the players, all the fans, most of the clubs. So I'm not really sure why Mr. Elston, when I've read pieces of him, a great piece Gareth Walker, one of our favourite journalists, he did in The Mirror, where he did a series of spreads over a few days interviewing Robert Elston, and in that Robert Elston seemed to suggest this was an RFL issue, not a Super League issue. Well, I don't buy that, I'm afraid, and I think the Super League clubs can drive something forward themselves on this now that they've separated away, and I honestly can't see a reason why they can't. So there you go. The fifth question we asked was, do you like the change to bring Golden Point into Super League regular season games? And this one was fairly split as well, but I wasn't particularly surprised with the outcome. It was one of the ones where fewer people voted on, 340 in this one. 38% yes, they like the change to bring in Golden Point. It should add some excitement. 62% said no.